Hello. Today we are looking at the subject entitled Spirituality is Subjective. Sister Denise, I bid you a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. What I find interesting is that having listened to you before, I know that you have stated that part of being spiritual or leading a spiritual lifestyle means understanding or emerging the observer within. How is it that one can do that, but yet spirituality is subjective?
I think the first key point that we need to make clear is that the world that we live in really gives a lot of importance to objective reality. And in comparison with objective being real, subjective is considered unreal or imaginary. They will say to you very easily, prove what you're saying, because objective reality is only real because it can be proved according to the scientific method. And what we're saying is right up front, spirituality is not objective reality because it has nothing to do with the material world. And there's nothing like proving or disproving it. We are saying is that the non-objective reality is not less real than objective reality. So what we're saying also is something which is subjective isn't by definition imaginary.
That is quite a hair to split, a very fine line to draw.
Well, we have to do that because we're talking about the inner world, and there are many people who experience the inner world and they can talk about it, and even though it's not objective reality, there is still a language and you can describe it and people will understand what you're talking about and they will have connected experiences. You may not be able to say whether or not it's identical, and it doesn't really even matter, because the point is something different. The point is for a person to connect with themselves in that inner dimension and to be able to connect with the divine. And you see, if there are this many people all over the world through the ages who've been talking about these things, then it satisfies the criteria of something real, where that criteria is, if it persists, it's real. And then in comparison with that criteria, objective reality, while you can replicate your tests according to the scientific method and you do prove objective reality in that sense, but any physical thing is ephemeral, is changing, is disappearing, and so, which is more real, it's really questionable.
If one is embarking on a spiritual journey, it's an internal thing, isn't it? There's no bells and whistles on the outside. It's internal.
Well, it's internal, but there are bells and whistles in the sense of there are there are signs on the outside that is going on the inside.
What are the signs?
The atmosphere that a person emanates.
Okay.
The feeling that is radiated into the atmosphere, the mentality of the person, the quality of their being, extent to which they maintain control over their thoughts, words, and actions. All these are physical signs.
Okay, but that is the product of having practiced spirituality, is it not?
When you practice spirituality, you also start doing certain things in the material world correspond to a spiritual life in the material world, because we're in the material world. But there's a difference between being spiritually oriented in the material world and being materialistic in the material world. For example, a materialistic person is a consumer. A spiritual person is a giver, a provider, especially into the material world, because you're calling energy into yourself from beyond the material world and you're spreading that in the material world. So you're actually enriching the material world.
So when one embraces spirituality, when you practice it, how do you know that what you are doing is real? And how do you know that what you are doing is not simply your imagination?
I think part of it has to do with whether you can maintain it and sustain it day after day, year after year, decade after decade, and see a tangible development taking place, that is definitely an indicator.
We cannot escape talking about God. Practically every entire episode we've done, but what I want to know is, you describe God as being very subtle. You've described him as being a point of light. You say that he lives beyond the physical universe. When one communicates with God, how do you know that he's listening, that he's responding, and that what you're doing in your meditation is not, lying to yourself about what it is you're experiencing?
I don't think you actually do it in order to produce an experience. Maybe in the early stages, but that's not really the point. What happens with people is they talk about the experience. Are you experiencing peace? Are you experiencing love? And these are very, very subjective descriptions, you see, because someone may be experiencing something. It's like pain, it's very subjective as well. But still, the medical profession has some indicators, 0 to 10, about how much someone is having pain. People have a different sense of it. It's sort of like color. Some people think it's green, some people think it's blue because they have different eyes. You start off saying, well, I'll believe it if I feel it, right? And once you have felt a number of different things, you've experienced a number of different things which you didn't maybe expect or whatever, different phenomena do occur, especially in the early stages of spiritual development, because you need some sort of feedback to let you know that it's happening. But as you go further, you get a sense of when you're in soul consciousness and when you're not in soul consciousness, and that is a switch in your mind, that you switch from one state to another state, and you start to become experienced in the different ways that it feels to be in one state or another state.
Sister Denise, this requires a very refined intellect, doesn't it?
As you continue in your spiritual practice, you're going to refine yourself, and you're going to be able to commit to memory what certain states feel like, and you're going to be able to bring that into your consciousness, because the whole thing is a very subtle exploration, and ultimately it's about becoming more and more subtle. And the more subtle you become, the more connected with the divine you can be. So then you start to want to make yourself more quiet, more subtle, more stable through your 24 hours. And then there are many things which will pull you away from it. But because you're having a disciplined practice, you can bring yourself back to it any time. I think in the early period of your spiritual practice, you can have good meditations, no meditation, hope I can meditate, maybe it's not working. Go through all of that, because you have to shift from quite gross to really very subtle. But if you persist, if you are not stuck on the experience, it's better. What is tangible is the information.
That you obtain from where?
Well, the information that you work with, say your information is, consider yourself to be a soul at peace. While you're not peaceful, you consider that you can become peaceful. You play with it, because applying your mind to an idea is the thing that causes you to come into a certain state and to have a certain experience. Because words have feelings and states of being connected with them. There's a vibration with that word. Humans, we make words to refer to something that's much more internal anyway. So the word is always referring to an experience, actually. And then when you meditate on ideas which are formulated in words, it takes you to the experience. So you're going from something very tangible, a phrase, and going into the depth of it, that will take you to the experience.
In terms of the qualities that's required to get there, you mentioned concentration earlier. That plays a major role, doesn't it? What other qualities does one need so that you know, firstly, that you are doing, that you want to do it, and secondly, that you're doing it right?
In a way, every time you meditate, you're adding to the previous time that you meditated. As each meditation builds on the last one, and there are many, many roads down which you can go, but you have your highway as well. There's a map.
There's a map.
You have almost like a GPS.
Okay, what do you mean?
When you're meditating, you're going from starting point to somewhere, and how you go there is through a train of thought, and that train can go on various different tracks, which means that your mind will say, okay, I want to go into the depth of serenity. And so you gather together all the points about serenity that are of interest to you, and you taste them, you explore them, and as you're doing that, provoke associations, which you can also explore. And so you're sort of moving around in that area, much as you would be traveling in a landscape. You might say, oh, I'm lost now. Where do I go from here? So then you have to think, okay, well, where do I want to go? Serenity. Okay, where is serenity? So over there. Okay, so here am I. It's not that far. What are the different routes? You can see. Okay,
Sister Denise, given that spirituality is subjective, how do your thoughts become feelings?
There's a continuum where the concept of a thought is at one end of it and the experience of it is at the other end. So as you move along that road, you go from the idea to the experience, because the thought contains within it the possibility of the experience. So you start moving towards that, it'll start coming towards you.
So you can talk yourself into anything? Is that what you're saying?
You can, and this is why self-talk's quite important, because remember on another occasion I was telling you that you can tell yourself, don't go there. Means your mind starts going off down a negative track, and your intellect can say, you know, that's not where we want to go. We want to go over here, so let's go this way.
Throughout the series, you've used the word mind, you've used the word intellect, you've used the Hindi word sanskaras. You use this vocabulary very particularly in this context. Could you tell us how all of those three energies come into play?
Well, you are a soul. This is a statement. You are a soul. And you say, okay, what's that? It's a being. You have a body. Your body's an object. So you start, it's a kind of contrasting thing. So, okay, my body is an it, which is given the name she or he. So he, she, and it are all it. There's no pronoun for a being.
There's no pronoun for a being. The soul. Okay.
So when you say I, are you talking about I, this body, which is the body conscious I, or are you talking about I, the being, which is intangible, which is non-material? So you have to really do a lot of thinking, because your mind is oriented towards sense perception, and your mind is completely filled with tons and tons of memories of sense impressions. And then spirituality comes along and says, apply your mind to something that is not a sense impression, and your mind will say, I don't know how to do that. So patiently you say, okay, well, if you're an analytical type, mathematical type, Okay, think of a point, geometrical point. No depth, no width, no length, no height. You can think about it, but it doesn't have any physical existence, but yet it's a real thing, a geometric reality. So that's a really, really perfect place to start, because that is the intersection between material reality and non-material reality.
Whoa, 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 whoa. That is potent. A point. Please repeat that.
A point,
Yeah.
which has no length, no depth, no breadth, no width. It is the intersection between material reality and non-material reality.
Wow. All that in a point.
All that in a point, and
Okay.
that is the point. Because we have to start somewhere, and meditation practice involves saying, I am a point, that point, but it's not a physical point. So it's a self-aware, non-material point, and it is me. I am that. And the rest of you says, what?
And Sister Denise, more importantly, if you say that, then if you put that thought out there, or shall I say in there, okay, you don't feel anything.
No, you don't. But you have to start by this gateway, which takes you from the world of material perception, sense perception, to non-material perception. So, okay, I'm a point, and I'm non-material, and I am a being. I'm conscious, self-aware, and I am not this body. So you're talking about what you're not, and you're talking about what you are. Then you apply these 5 qualities that I mentioned from time to time. And the reason is because you have a contrast. You have like a line, and this is something that new physicists, they talk about, a line between material reality, which on the other side of that line has a mirror image, which is non-material. And this is a concept and a discovery that brings science and spirituality a lot closer than they had been before. So what you can do in your mind is say, okay, I'm crossing that line. On this side of the line you have air, earth, fire, water, and ether, the 5 stable elements of matter. And then on the other side of the line you have purity, peace, power, love, bliss, which are the qualities of the spirit, or the elemental qualities of the spirit. So you say to yourself, okay, myself is made of this stuff, and my body is made of this stuff. Now we know from science that matter is basically light, and we know from spiritual knowledge that the soul is a point of light. So it's the same thing. One is material light, one is spiritual light. And in order for me to conceptualize the light of matter, I have to use my intellect, because you can't perceive it, but you can comprehend it. In the same way, using the same aspect of consciousness, I can comprehend that myself is light, and that light of the self is made up of these qualities, and the light of matter, my body, is made up of these elements. And the two work together, they're symbiotic, and the soul experiences matter through the body, but it doesn't have to go there. It can actually turn, the energy of the mind, you turn that back upon its own self, and then you will experience the state of your mind through your mind, and then you will touch your peace, your love, your purity, your bliss, and your power. And this is what meditation is about.
Okay, Sister Denise, one cannot ignore that as you engage in that practice, your demons will say, hello, we're also here. What about us? We need some attention too.
I think when you're busy dealing with the intellectual side of it, it doesn't provoke them.
But at some stage it gets provoked.
So let's look at what stage it gets provoked. So when you're looking at it intellectually, it doesn't provoke demons. Where do the demons come from is when you're not meditating and you're just generally there in the state of being a person who's feeling whatever comes along to be felt. And the fact that you have done this makes you overall more sensitive, and it sets up a situation where on the one hand you are pulling away from the influence of matter, and what that does is it starts to exert a magnetic attraction on the soul, which is where the demons start to be felt.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very useful in meditation to spend a lot of time on the intellectual end of it to set up the framework, and then you can add the color and texture of your inner experience on something which is really very solid on the inside. So the intellect applied to spiritual knowledge, and applying spiritual knowledge to your idea of yourself, that's then your grid, if you will. And then when you're not paying attention, some circumstance will happen. Why? Because you are in the karmic, or the field of action, the karma kshetra. And on the field of action, something happens and you will react to it, and this is because you have a karmic bondage, and you immediately get pulled into material consciousness because your state of spiritual awareness is not very solid yet, and it takes time to make it solid. So you're pulled into that, and then you feel all kinds of opposite of your spiritual feelings, and then you say, I don't like this. And then you have to let it go and once again practice.
When you're meditating, is it a head thing or a heart thing? Where are you at?
You know, Rajyoga meditation is not really a technique.
It's not?
No. It's a terrain.
Yeah, okay.
And, there's yoga of the intellect, which is what I just described. Then there's yoga of the mind, which is very, very subtle. And so I think it's good to start with the yoga of the intellect to get your framework going and get all the bits in the right place. And then as you become more and more subtle, then you just be what you are, and that resonates with and connects you onto the dimension where the Supreme Being is, and then you have that communion which is experienced in the heart and in the mind and in the atmosphere, you see. But to get it going, the mechanics of it really is the intellectual bit, so that any time if you lose connection, you can go back to the grid and then move from there.
So your intellectual understanding then establishes what, like a foundation for you?
You know, when you're doing, I don't know, you probably don't know, but when you're making cartoons, three-dimensional cartoons, what they do is they have a grid, lots and lots of lines which can be manipulated through electronically, and then you cover that with a skin and you color that and texture it and so on. So I think that meditation is in a way rather like that, in that you have a grid of information that is quite tangible and quite easy to start from. Because when you want to go into the experience of it, the subtlety of it, using a capacity of perception which is being made more and more subtle, but you start off rather gross, you see. So you're more easily able to manage with the grid and then slowly move into, the texture and color of your relationship with the divine.
Okay, Sister Denise, we have to stop talking right now, unfortunately, but you've given an amazing level of insight into what meditation is, and I'm sure most of the ladies and women watching you across the globe have not applied their mind to it to the extent that you have, and I genuinely thank you from my heart for your wisdom and insight. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us at home. We don't have time to say goodbye, so goodbye.